Have you ever wondered why a man, strong in body, stable in voice, and unshakable in public, can fall to pieces in the silence of a woman's gaze? He walks the world armored in logic, guided by reason, praised for his power. But beneath the stoicism lies a trembling chaos he's never been allowed to name. In the eyes of the world, he must not flinch. But in the eyes of a woman who sees through him, who touches the unconscious parts he's buried beneath decades of masculine pride, he finds both terror and relief. Because in that gaze, she sees it. The unspoken ache, the fracture beneath the surface, the desire he dare not admit, even to himself. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And fate, for the modern man, has been a cage crafted by his own denial. He does not speak of what he craves most, not out of shame, but because he cannot even name it. It has been pushed into shadow, those hidden corners of his psyche that still remember boyhood yearning, unmet needs, and the primal longing to be seen, not for what he does, but for who he is beneath all that doing. The first of these forbidden desires lies in his need to be devastated by the feminine. Not broken by cruelty, but unraveled by presence. He wants to be pierced, not by criticism, but by truth. The kind of truth only a woman who has danced with her own shadow can wield. She who does not flinch from his rage. She who does not run from his grief. She who understands that behind every man's desire to conquer is a deeper longing to surrender, but not to weakness. To her knowing, to her mirror, to the reflection of the parts he lost in childhood. Parts that now yearn to be resurrected not through therapy or logic, but through myth, through mystery, through the ancient rhythm of feminine power. It is a paradox few dare to face, that the stronger the man appears on the outside, the more fragile his soul may be beneath. Not weak, fragile. Like fine glass containing sacred wine. The world rewards his strength, but it is her softness, unyielding and fierce, that invites him to collapse. Not in defeat, but in revelation. And yet, how many women have been told to silence that softness, to become hard so they can be safe, to outman the men in a world ruled by masculine metrics? But when she steps back into her essence, when she learns that her softness is not submission but seduction, not passivity but presence, then she becomes a mirror, not of performance, but of truth. In that mirror, he sees what he fears most, himself. This is not romantic. This is spiritual warfare. Because she does not meet his ego, she meets his anima, the inner feminine that Jung spoke of, long buried under the expectations of manhood. And this anima has been exiled. She is not welcome in boardrooms or battlefields, but she is present in dreams, in art, in longing. And when a woman embodies the depth of herself, shadow and all, she calls forth this buried feminine in him, awakening something ancient, something terrifying, something tender. But few men admit this. They cover it with bravado, with conquest, with silence. And yet, deep inside, they crave a woman who doesn't just stroke their ego, but disrupts it, who doesn't merely comfort their wounds, but names them. Not to shame, but liberate. She must not be afraid of the dark, because the second desire he cannot name is his need to be witnessed in his rage, not corrected, not fixed, witnessed. The modern man is told that anger is dangerous, that emotion is weakness, that vulnerability is feminine. And so he compresses, suppresses, implodes. But somewhere within, there's a boy who was never allowed to cry, never allowed to scream, never allowed to grieve. And so the man becomes silent, stoic on the outside, burning on the inside. What he craves is not a solution. What he craves is a container. A woman whose nervous system does not collapse in the face of his intensity. A woman who has faced her own shadows so deeply that his no longer scare her. When she meets his chaos with grounded presence, she becomes alchemy. Not therapist, not mother, but witness. He may never ask for it in words. He may never even know what he needs, but he feels it when she offers it. It is in the way she breathes when he's loud, the way she holds his stare when he's hurting, the way she refuses to minimize her own power just to soothe his. That is the magic of the awakened feminine. She does not rescue the man. She remembers him, and in that remembrance, he remembers himself. And yet the final and most forbidden desire, the one he guards most fiercely, even from his own soul, is the hunger to belong, not in the world, not in the tribe, but in her world. To be chosen, not for his usefulness, but for his essence. For the man he is when the armor falls away, when the titles are stripped, when the mask slips and the boy beneath looks up terrified and whispers, "Am I enough?" This is not a desire he confesses, because it threatens the myth of masculine independence, the illusion of self-sufficiency he has been conditioned to wear like a second skin. The Stoics taught him to master desire, to tame emotion, but even Marcus Aurelius in his solitude would have yearned for a moment of pure understanding, someone who did not need him to lead, provide, or conquer, only to be. And yet, men have been shamed out of this longing, told it makes them weak, needy, unworthy of respect. So instead, they posture, they accumulate, they chase, not women, but worth, in her eyes, in her approval, in her affection. But what he truly wants, what he aches for, is not approval. It is recognition, not as a role, not as a provider, not as a prize winner, but as a soul. A man who has faced his own demons and stands scarred but whole, asking not to be adored, but to be accepted. And this is where the woman, who has done her own shadow work, who has stepped out of the performance of femininity and into the embodiment of it, becomes the sanctuary, not the solution, not the savior, but the sacred space in which his truth is safe. Because a man cannot find this recognition from a woman who seeks only to be chosen. That energy smells of lack, of need, of collapse, and he cannot surrender in the arms of someone who needs him to prove her worth. But when she walks rooted in her own self-possession, when her silence speaks more than her words, when her gaze penetrates deeper than any seduction, she becomes irresistible. Not because she tries, but because she knows. She knows her worth. She does not beg for love, she radiates it. She does not perform to please, she reveals to awaken. And in that revelation, he sees something ancient flicker back to life. The instinct to protect, not because she's fragile, but because she's sacred. Not because she needs saving, but because she mirrors the part of him he was told to exile, the soft, the intuitive, the emotional, the feeling. The feeling, called it the inner marriage, the sacred union between the animus and the anima, the masculine and the feminine within. And until a man reunites with that inner feminine, he will project her outward, onto the woman who holds his gaze a second too long, onto the woman whose voice stirs him without reason, onto the woman who feels like a dream he forgot, a home he's never seen. But projection is not love. It is the soul trying to find itself in another. And without awareness, it leads to addiction, to obsession, to collapse. That is why the empowered feminine must be discerning. He may crave her, he may even worship her, but until he reclaims the anima within himself, he will try to possess her, to contain what he does not yet understand. And she must not collapse into that desire, because the woman who knows herself does not allow her sacred energy to become a playground for someone else's unprocessed shadow. She does not dim her light to soothe his insecurity. She does not betray her intuition to satisfy his ego. Instead, she offers presence, not forever, not unconditionally, but as an invitation to rise, to remember, to return to himself. And the man who accepts that invitation, who chooses growth over comfort, truth over illusion, sovereignty over control, he will meet not only the woman, but himself. He will step out of the collective trance. He will stop looking for salvation in sex, in status, in submission, and he will begin the journey back to his own soul. Because here is the secret the world forgets. Behind every emotionally unavailable man is a boy who was told his feelings made him unlovable. And behind every powerful woman is a girl who learned that her power made others leave. When these two meet, conscious, courageous, and no longer willing to betray themselves, they do not fall in love, they rise into it, together, fully seen, fully met, fully free. But this kind of union, this raw, soul-shattering dance between conscious feminine and awakened masculine, doesn't begin with romance. It begins with truth. And truth, as Jung warned, is often the most dangerous thing a human being can face, because it strips away illusion, it dismantles persona, it burns through the masks we've worn so long we began to believe they were our skin. For a man to admit these hidden desires, to name them, to confront them, to feel them, he must first face the terrifying possibility that everything he was taught about strength was a lie. That strength is not the absence of need, but the mastery of it. That real courage is not found in dominance, but in depth, and that the true masculine is not defined by how much he can control, but by how much he can hold emotion, chaos, grief, and yes, the piercing power of a woman who sees him completely. And that woman, the one who awakens him, does not always arrive with gentleness. Sometimes she is the storm, the disruption, the crisis he never asked for but secretly longed to encounter. Because she does not come to comfort his ego, she comes to resurrect his soul. She may enter his life like a wildfire, blazing, untamed, impossible to predict. She shakes the foundations he thought were solid. She questions everything he built to feel safe. And somewhere, beneath the surface, he knows, this is not a threat. This is a calling. Because he doesn't just want her body. He wants her depth, her wildness, her defiance of the smallness he's confined himself to. He wants to touch something infinite inside her, and in doing so, remember the infinite within himself. But to reach her, to truly meet her, he must leave behind the wounded archetypes that have ruled him for so long. The performer, the provider, the predator. These roles, though once useful, now limit his evolution. They trap him in cycles of proving, performing, and pleasing. And the awakened feminine does not bow to performance. She waits for presence. And presence cannot be faked. It comes only when a man has journeyed into the underworld of his own psyche, where the shadows speak and the ego dissolves, where the father wound bleeds, where the mother wound lingers, where the boy who was told to man up still sobs in secret, waiting for someone, not to rescue him, but to recognize him. That recognition is not hers to give, it is his to claim. But her energy, when embodied, can ignite that claiming. She becomes a mirror, a trigger, a flame, not because she tries, but because she is. She does not chase, she does not plead, she remembers herself. And in that remembrance, he finds the courage to remember himself too. And in that remembering, something extraordinary happens. He stops craving her validation. He starts craving her respect, not as a reward, but as a reflection of the man he is becoming. And this is the secret longing that rarely reaches the surface of male consciousness. The desire not to be needed by a woman, but to be worthy of her depth, of her discernment, of her divinity. Because when a woman reclaims her power, she becomes dangerous, not in cruelty, but in clarity. She sees through illusion. She feels the space between his words. She knows when he's leading from ego or from essence. And she will not pretend. She will not enable. She will not bend herself to fit the wounds he refuses to heal. This is the very thing that both terrifies and magnetizes him. He may run from it. He may try to dominate it. He may try to possess it. But deep in his psyche, beneath the conditioning, beneath the pride, he knows this is what I've been searching for. Not a woman who obeys, not a woman who submits, but a woman who stands rooted in her truth, who demands nothing but authenticity, and who loves him not for who he pretends to be, but for who he dares to become. And so the question is no longer, what does a man want? The real question is he willing to face himself deeply enough to receive what he wants? Because a woman in her power does not wait. She attracts, she awakens, she chooses. And unless he rises into a man who can meet her there, she will not dim herself to make him comfortable. She would rather walk alone in truth than be held in falsehood. And the man who feels that loss, not of her body, but of her respect, that is often the crucible of his awakening, the beginning of his descent into the shadow, the moment where he finally stops blaming, performing, pretending, and starts becoming. When a man enters this descent into the cavernous realm of his shadow, into the territory where his fears are no longer abstract but alive, he begins to understand why he was never able to truly receive love. Because love is not just light. Love is not ease. Real love, the kind that transforms, that burns away illusion, that births the soul anew, is forged in fire. And the woman who carries that fire is not here to soothe his ego. She's here to refine it. This is where most turn back. The fear is too great. The boy inside trembles. The mind screams for control. The ego tries to bargain. Give me her, but don't take my defenses. Let me keep the walls, the masks, the lies. But the awakened feminine does not negotiate with illusion. She waits on the other side of truth, and the only currency is surrender. To step fully into his manhood, his true manhood, not the performance, not the cultural archetype, not the toxic imitation. He must let the old self die, the self that needed her to be small so he could feel big, the self that called her too much when she mirrored his own unread emotions, the self that feared her depth because he had not yet faced his own. And it is here, in the death of that false self, that the third hidden desire begins to surface, the craving not just for love or even belonging, but for meaning, to be part of something sacred. To not merely have a woman, but to stand beside a woman who challenges him into greatness, not through manipulation, not through control, but through her unapologetic being. He doesn't just want her touch, he wants her presence, her prayer, her passion, her pain. He wants to know that when he touches her body, he is also touching her soul. And he wants his own soul to be ready, to be clean, to be whole, to be worthy of that union. But few men are taught how to prepare for this. They're told to provide, to perform, to win. But what she needs is not a winner. What she needs is a warrior of the heart, a man who has sat with his rage until it softened into purpose, a man who has held his shame until it dissolved into wisdom, a man who has wept, not because he was broken, but because he was healing. This is the man who can hold her, not just physically, energetically, spiritually. The man who does not flinch when she cries without explanation, who does not retreat when her power roars, who does not demand her to shrink when her light threatens his shadows. He doesn't run, he doesn't blame, he breathes, he rises. And in this rising, he reclaims the king within, not the tyrant, not the boy in a crown, but the initiated king, the one who knows that real power is in presence, not control, who protects not because he's insecure, but because he values, who leads not from dominance, but from deep listening, who loves not to fill a void, but to honor the divine in her. She recognizes him not by his status, not by his possessions, but by the way her nervous system softens in his presence, by the way her truth feels safe in his silence, by the way her fire does not scare him, but ignites him. This is the kind of man every awakened woman prays into being, and this is the kind of woman every conscious man secretly longs to earn, not through charm, not through conquest, but through transformation. He may not say it, he may not even know how to think it, but he feels it, deep in his bones, in dreams he can't explain, in the way her voice lingers even after she's gone. He craves a woman who reminds him of God, not in a dogmatic sense, but in the way the sacred feminine speaks to the parts of him that no longer remember their own holiness. This craving for initiation, for union, for the sacred, is the forbidden psychology that Jung whispered of. It is not about seduction. It is about integration, the alchemy of opposites, the dance of light and shadow, the reunion of soul fragments long exiled in the name of survival. And when a man dares to answer this call, not with performance, but with presence, he becomes more than desirable. He becomes dangerous to a culture built on numbness, because now he sees, now he feels, now he knows. And the woman who once had to shrink to be loved no longer accepts crumbs. She no longer waits. She no longer pleads. She chooses. And when she chooses him, it is not out of need, but out of resonance. A frequency only those who have walked through their own hell and emerged sovereign can recognize in each other. This frequency, the quiet pulse of sovereignty, meeting sovereignty, is what the unconscious masculine has been searching for in every conquest, in every shallow glance, in every fleeting intimacy that left him emptier than before. And only now, standing at the edge of his own transformation, does he understand. It was never about having her. It was about becoming someone who could hold the magnitude of her being without flinching. Because she is not merely a woman. She is an initiation, a living portal between the seen and unseen. She does not speak in the language of logic, but in the rhythm of intuition. She remembers what he has forgotten. That connection is not built on words, it is built on presence. And presence cannot be bought, cannot be faked, cannot be seduced. It must be embodied. When he finally embodies that presence, when he becomes still enough to hear the whisper of his anima, when he no longer runs from the soft, the subtle, the sacred, he meets a part of himself that has been calling to him from the beginning. The part that doesn't need to dominate or impress or chase, the part that simply is, steady, rooted, enough. And from this place, the dynamic shifts. He no longer needs her to reflect his worth. She no longer needs him to complete her. They are no longer playing out the wounds of childhood, the archetypes of abandonment and validation. They become mirrors, yes, but not of the wounded past, of the sovereign self, of the soul in its wholeness. Now, the energy between them becomes sacred, charged not by dependency, but by devotion, not the devotion of obedience, but of recognition. He does not worship her in codependence, he honors her in clarity. She does not test him to provoke his pain, she challenges him to meet her truth. And this kind of union, this conscious, awakened alchemical bond, is not a fairy tale. It is not easy. It requires death after death of the false self. It demands the end of fantasy. It requires fierce accountability, brutal honesty, and a reverence for the mystery that lies between two whole beings who refuse to betray themselves for the illusion of safety. In this space, sex becomes ceremony. Words become spells. Eye contact becomes prayer. Silence becomes sanctuary. Because now they are not chasing each other. They are not performing for each other. They are remembering together, remembering who they are, who they've always been beneath the scripts, the scars, the masks, divine, whole, and terrifyingly powerful. But make no mistake, this kind of love, this level of intimacy, is not for the faint of heart. It will expose every unhealed wound. It will shatter every illusion of control. It will force each to face the ways they have abandoned themselves in the pursuit of approval. And still, it will liberate. She will no longer fear her intensity. He will no longer run from his vulnerability. And together they will create a field so magnetic, so rooted in truth, that others feel it just by being near them. This is the power of two individuals who have done the work, not perfectly, but courageously, who have faced the inner war not to fix each other, but to free themselves. And in that freedom, they offer the world something rare, something revolutionary, a new story of love. One not built on roles or fear or silent resentment, but one born from awareness, from ownership, from sacred responsibility, where I choose you does not mean I need you to complete me, but I meet you here as I am, without masks, without games, without fear. And in that meeting, something ancient is healed, something generational is broken, because they are no longer puppets of the collective shadow. They are no longer trapped in unconscious repetition. They are awake. And because they are awake, they can love from wholeness, not from hunger. She no longer has to ask for him to see her. She knows he sees her, not because he says the right words, but because when she walks into the room, his entire being aligns, his eyes soften, his breath deepens, his energy says what no script ever could: I am here, and I see all of you. And she, in turn, becomes the grounding force he never knew he craved, not because she nurtures his fragility, but because her strength does not threaten him. Her voice does not diminish him. Her fire does not burn him. It baptizes him. This is the kind of woman he never knew he needed. This is the kind of man she never thought existed. And yet here they are, not perfect, not finished, but present, together, awake. But to remain present in this kind of union requires more than desire. It demands discipline, a sacred discipline. The daily choice to show up, stripped of performance, naked in truth. Because this love is not a peak to be reached. It is a practice. And like all spiritual practice, it will bring both ecstasy and agony, both light and shadow. It will ask again and again, will you choose love even when it doesn't look like comfort? Will you stay open even when it would be easier to close? He will falter. She will too. Not because they are flawed, but because they are human. But the difference now is that neither uses failure as an excuse to retreat into old wounds. They own their pain. They speak their truth. They do not weaponize silence. They do not punish with withdrawal. They stay. Because now they are not afraid of the shadow. They are not seduced by fantasy. They know that real intimacy begins where illusion ends. And so they speak, not to be right, but to be real. They listen, not to respond, but to understand. They touch, not to take, but to tune in. And when conflict arises, as it always does, it no longer becomes a war of egos, but an opportunity for refinement. Because they have both learned the greatest truth of love, that it is not a possession, it is not a transaction, it is a mirror, and it will always reflect the places within that are still unloved, still unintegrated, still aching to be seen. This is the crucible of conscious union. It will not flatter you, it will break you, but only to rebuild you into someone who no longer needs to be needed, only to connect. And in that connection, they become artists of each other's souls, not sculpting from control, but witnessing from reverence. He no longer seeks to fix her storms. She no longer tries to tame his fire. They hold space for each other's becoming. They celebrate each other's sovereignty. They remember, this is not about ownership. This is about awakening. Because when a man has walked through his own inferno, when he has touched the cold stone of his shame and the burning coals of his rage, when he has sat long enough with his own stillness to finally feel his heartbeat again, he no longer fears the power of a woman. He needs it, not as validation, as vibration, as activation, as the sacred reminder that life is not meant to be survived, it is meant to be felt. And the woman who meets him there, she has not arrived by accident. She too has bled for this knowing. She has cracked under the weight of pretending. She has mourned every piece of herself she once gave away for crumbs. She has become whole, not in spite of her wounds, but because of them. Now, she does not give herself away. She offers, with discernment, with clarity, with the fierce knowing that her love is a gift, not a gamble. Her body, her energy, her presence, they are not currency. They are cathedrals, and only a man who walks with humility and sacred intent may enter. So when he touches her, it is not possession, it is prayer. When he speaks her name, it is not ownership, it is offering. When he stands beside her, it is not to overshadow, but to amplify. Because he understands now that her rise is not a threat to his masculinity, it is the completion of it. And in this space, this rare, wild, holy ground, intimacy becomes a force of creation. Not just of romance, not just of pleasure, but of transcendence. Together, they build something that defies time, defies logic, defies the broken rules of modern love. They build a kingdom, not with walls and crowns, but with truth and trust. They laugh often, not because life is easy, but because they are free. They hold each other, not in desperation, but in devotion. They walk apart sometimes because space is sacred too, but always, always they return. Not to safety, but to truth. And what once was hidden, those deep, unspoken desires, are now no longer shameful. They have become sacred. He craved to be unraveled by her presence. He longed to be witnessed in his chaos. He yearned to be chosen not for performance, but for presence. And now, with a woman who embodies both fire and softness, who walks in truth and refuses to abandon herself, he receives all three, not as fantasy, but as fate earned through awakening. She does not belong to him. She belongs to herself. But still, she chooses him. And in that choice, something ancient is healed, not just between a man and a woman, but within the very fabric of humanity. Because now, two individuals stand as broken halves seeking completion, but as sovereign beings who have chosen to meet in the space where wholeness honors wholeness. She no longer shrinks to be understood. She no longer bends to be loved. Her voice no longer trembles when she speaks her truth. She has become the woman who once lived only in her dreams, the one who can walk away from anything that dims her fire because her fire is not a weapon. It is her truth. And he, once terrified of being seen, now welcomes it, not because it's comfortable, but because it's real. He does not crave her to patch his wounds. He's tended to those. He does not need her to tame his wildness. He has learned how to wield it. He no longer fears her strength, her silence, her knowing gaze. He meets it, not with defense, but with presence. Together, they are no longer seduced by performance. Their connection doesn't dance for attention. It breathes, quietly, powerfully. Theirs is a love that does not scream to be seen. It radiates effortlessly because it is born of depth, not display. Now, their conversations are not negotiations for affection. They are doorways into the soul. Their arguments are not battles for dominance. They are clearings for truth. Their touch is not transaction, it is transmission. A sacred current exchanged between two nervous systems that have learned not to fear intimacy, but to honor it as the language of the divine. They do not chase. They do not cling. They choose, every day, in every moment. They choose honesty over comfort, growth over stagnation, devotion over fantasy. And in that choosing, they create something the world desperately needs but rarely sees: conscious union, not perfection, not purity, not constant pleasure, but real, raw, sovereign love. A love that says, I will not abandon myself for you, and I will not ask you to abandon yourself for me. A love that says, I've walked through my darkness, I've made peace with my wounds, I see yours too, and I do not flinch. A love that says, we are not here to escape each other's humanity, we are here to hold it. In this field, freedom and intimacy are no longer opposites, they are one, because they have freed themselves within. And from that liberation, they offer a love that does not trap, but transcends. The woman who once feared she was too much now knows she was never too much. She was just never in the room with someone deep enough to hold her. And now she is. Not because he completed her, because she completed herself. And from that wholeness, she recognized him. And the man who once feared his vulnerability, made him weak, now understands his ability to be seen is his strength. His openness is not a risk, it is a revolution. And through that revolution, he found her, not as a prize, but as a partner. They are not the exception, they are the example of what becomes possible when a woman no longer seeks permission to rise and a man no longer fears what that rising awakens in him. And in their union, they remind the world, love is not possession. Love is not performance. Love is not pain disguised as passion. Love is presence. Love is power. Love is the meeting of two sovereign souls who have stopped abandoning themselves and now choose, every day, to meet in the sacred space between truth and tenderness. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. If this message touched something deep within you, whether you're a man seeking to be seen or a woman reclaiming her sacred power, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what resonated most with you. And if you want more content like this, filled with depth, shadow, and soul, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your presence here matters. Thank you for being part of this sacred conversation.